Hello, my name is Bob Brown, and it's my privilege to host this show, which is based on the reality that Westborough is a great town filled with interesting people. Many of them are long-term residents who have so many memories and stories about life in Westborough in days gone past. And so your local cable station, Westborough TV, has initiated this series of programs which are designed to reflect upon life in earlier days and to possibly make suggestions about how we can improve life in this fine town for the future. The history of Westborough is important, that we record it and make it available for posterity. And one of the key folks in that process is Glenn Parker, who was an ex-police chief of town, been in town for a long, long time, and I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more. But Glenn is here today to help us understand a phenomenon in this town that is rapidly fading away, and that's the trolley system. So I'd like to have the opportunity now to let Glenn just tell you about the trolleys.
Thank you very much. As Bob said, I've been in town for a long time. I was actually born in Westborough, right on East Main Street where the trolley line crosses over East Main. Grew up in Northborough and went to Northborough schools. Came back in the mid-60s and joined the police department and retired after 32 years. But history, especially local history, has always been my passion. And one of the areas that was most interesting to me became the trolleys of Westborough. And that came about as a result of doing some research on the police department. And what I discovered was that the first police chief, William Magner, was run over and killed by a trolley. And it just got me interested in trolleys. Where were the trolleys? Well, this particular one happened to be in Framingham. And so I started going back in the history from 1912 when he was killed and looking at what was going on in this area, Westborough, at the turn of the century. And I got back as far as 1897, and lo and behold, here's the first trolley line to be built in Worcester County, coming down what we know today as the Post Road, Route 20, out of Worcester, through Northborough and Shrewsbury, and into Marlborough. And then off of that was a spur line that started in Northborough Center and just followed Route 135, Milk Street, right into Westborough Center. And so in the spring of 1897, this line was completed, and the trolley line started its eventual growth in the area and provided a necessary means of transportation for a number of people in this area, in Westborough specifically, because Westborough was, the downtown area was kind of an industrial site. We had the hat factory, we had straw works, we had Westborough Weaving, we had the Humber Bicycle Company, we had the locomobile that was being manufactured, parts of, in town, Bartlett Box Company. So there was a lot of jobs in Westborough, downtown, and the population at the time was only about 5,000 people. So that there needed to be a way for people to come in from other communities to work in Westborough Center. And it was a boon. It was so welcomed to have the first means of urban mass transit. And out of that grew a system in Westborough consisting of 5 street railway companies. So the first one was in 1897, overnight success. The next line to go in was in 1901, which was the Worcester to Grafton to Westborough line. Came down Route 30, right down Nurse Street, West Main Street, right into the center of town. And then it hooked up with another line that was built the same year that went from Westborough Center to Marlborough. Now that line was a little different. It went out East Main Street, over Lyman Street, to Lake Chauncey. Big turnout there. and then it went on to Marlborough, but it went cross country. So it went over Haskell Street through what we know today as Human Farms. It came out by the ice cream stand, where Human's ice cream stand is. Then it continued down Route 30 to Southborough, and then went overland and into Marlborough. And that was the Westborough to Marlborough line. The trolley companies actually built the amusements and the picnic areas at Lake Chauncey because that was one of their ways of increasing ridership.
Sure.
And they did that in several areas along the way, wherever there was a water property that they could purchase and develop, they did that. And so that line became extremely popular. Not only did it take care of the Lake Chauncey area, but it also took care of the state hospital. There was a trolley station there at Haskell Street and Lyman Street. It became a house later, and the house is still there.
Yeah, right.
But the next line that was to be built was in 2003, and that was the Westborough to Woodville line. So there was a line that came out of our downtown, and in fact joined up with the other lines, and went through Woodville into Hopkinton, and then on to Boston. That was called the Middlesex Railway Line.
Now, what route did that take? Because you had the swamp in between there.
Well, it went right down 135.
135.
Right
okay.
through Woodville,
Okay.
and then into Hopkinton. And then it went to Ashland. And eventually wound up in Boston, but they called that the Middlesex.
Let me just interrupt for a moment,
Certainly.
and you may be going to cover this, but I'm just curious. You describe many routes that are very hilly. How did the trolleys get up over those hills, or did they not?
They did, but they were electric. So all electric power, and there were power stations built along the lines to push them through the hilly areas. The last line, in fact, was the Boston to Worcester trolley line, and it was a dual track line. It was a bigger, faster, more expansive line. That came out of Worcester and then through Shrewsbury, but that line went cross country until it reached Westborough. So it paralleled what we know today as Route 9. Okay. It was then the Worcester Turnpike. It paralleled Route 9. It came out onto Route 9 right around the town line at Northborough, and then ran right down the side of the old Worcester Turnpike. Later on, of course, that all changed. It only went 1.5 miles down the road, down Route 9. And then it veered off the road, went south at Park Street. And there was a station there.
Okay.
And that was, we called it the Park Street Station. It was also known as the Lyman Street Station, Lyman School Station. Then it paralleled Route 9 through the orchards and fields till it reached Lyman Street. It crossed Lyman.
Right.
Then again through.
Can we just say there's a remnants of the trolley line there, correct?
Yes.
So
Scouts put up a
so
memorial
people can
there.
get some sense of where you're talking about.
All right.
Good.
Right there at the driveway where it goes into Julio's Plaza.
Right.
Then it went through an area called the Westborough Agricultural Park, the forerunner of the Grange. It exited onto East Main Street, crossed East Main, and then went through the woods again, and up over Hill and Dale, and through the Walkup Robinson property, onto Southborough, through the woods, over Washington
Let's remind
Street.
people that as they walk on the Walkup property, they're walking on part of the line.
The trolley line.
And you come to that little overpass where the cattle was able to go through.
Yeah, that's cattle overpass. And then it exited at White's Corner, the old restaurant, White's Corner Junction, and then followed Route 9 again, all the way into Boston.
Wow.
So that there was a small area, 1.5 miles, that went right through Westborough, right down the turnpike, and then off the road, and then over the woods. That line specifically went that route because of the hills. The hills being a problem, they tried to avoid them as much as possible when going down the east, the west, the east route. There was a very large power station at Otis Street and Route 9, where the car companies are today. Very big brick structure, waiting station, power station, maintenance area. They stored all kinds of railroad ties there, and that was a pretty big operation. There was also a power station where Bay State Abrasives built their initial building. So that was back in 1910. They put the Consolidated Street Railway Company, that's what it was at the time, built a power plant on the site of the Bay State kiln, Bay State Abrasives kiln. When it closed, that power station closed, that's when Bay State bought it. They bought it in 1921 and made it their kiln for baking wheels. And so that building itself was just a rather small building, but that was a power station.
And that's on Bay State property, that's where the big chimney was.
Yeah,
correct?
Close to it,
Very
yes.
close to that.
Yeah, close to it. And then there was a trolley barn at East Main Street, and we call it Tufts, the old Tufts building. That was a trolley barn and a waiting station, but that held about 8 cars, so it was pretty big. You got to remember these trolleys were huge.
Yeah, they're big.
They were 12 feet tall. They were 40 feet long. They were as big as a trailer truck is today. And for some reason, they made it underneath the bridge all those years without getting hit.
Pull down the antenna.
That's right. That's all they did, because the lines went right underneath the bridge.
Yeah.
And so now it's 1904. We have 5 separate trolley companies in the town of Westborough. One going down Route 9, the big one, Boston or Worcester. One coming in from Worcester on Route 30. One going out of town to Marlborough, and one going to Hopkinton, and the oldest one, 135 to Northborough.
Great, yeah.
And they built them rather quickly. They were built by the Italians. They had Italian immigrants come in from the railroad. They brought them right in. They set up their tents right there, made little communities, and just worked on those street railways till they were all done, and then moved on to the next town.
What kind of equipment did they have to work on it?
They did have, most of it was done by hand, all the digging. And one of the things that's not strange, but was that there wasn't an awful lot of excavation. They didn't have to do an awful lot with these because they were going down existing roads for the most part. So like when they built the first one down 135, the road was there, they just went along the side of it. And so the biggest thing was bringing in the iron. The rails themselves.
But just to interrupt you, they must have done a lot of filling. If we to go back to walk-up again, that's a raised bed.
Yeah, they did on the Boston and Worcester.
Okay.
That one. They had to do cut and fill.
Okay.
Because they went through wetlands.
Yeah.
And they went around natural hazards that were too big, and through the hills. And yeah, there was some cut and fill, but most of it was done by hand. Early, 1904, 03, 04.
And who did the stonework? The Italian?
Italians all did it. They built all those nice cow passes and bridges.
Yeah.
And they're still there.
Yeah.
In many cases.
And you look at the size of those rocks.
They're huge.
Two guys didn't pick those up.
No. They must have used the old methods of leverage and fulcrums and ropes and things like that. It didn't appear that there were any issues with the building of it. There might have been a few specifics about school children will ride free. They did. Fares were always an issue. They started out as a nickel. You could go from Westborough to Northborough Center for a nickel, and then you could go on to Shrewsbury for another nickel, and then another nickel to Worcester. So it was a 15-cent ride. They made numerous stops along the way, and any place where there was somebody waving at the trolley, it would stop. So there were no designated stopping areas. It just happened that if you want to take the trolley into Westborough Center and you lived out on the line, you just went out and waited for it to come.
Yeah.
And they came on quite a regular basis in the beginning. And like I said, it flourished until about the First World War. And you've got the introduction of motor vehicles. And although there weren't a whole lot of motor vehicles in the early part of 1900, as the teens came in, you would see more and more motor vehicles. And so this became a precursor of what was going to happen. And they could see this. So in the First World War, ridership dropped off because a lot of the folks went off to the war. Even though business thrived, the trolley companies went into the business of transporting merchandise. They helped the railroads move equipment and war materials. So they did pretty well throughout the First World War, but then when the war was over and that business went away and the ridership dropped off, motor vehicles became much more important. Then the lines slowly reduced their schedules, but their fees went up. The equipment became old and very expensive to replace, and they weren't doing that, so there was a lot of breakdowns. Winters became more difficult to deal with because of snow removal, and if they had a particularly bad snowstorm, they wouldn't clear the lines. They would wait a couple of days and then clear the lines when it would be easier, or the sun would melt the snow. And so it just became increasingly more expensive for them to operate. So by the early 20s, a couple of the lines that weren't doing quite as well ceased to operate, and followed shortly after that by the rest of the localized lines. The big line, the Boston-Worcester, that remained open until 1930. But that also went through the same process of reduced ridership and costs. And it went through a series of significant losses. The car barn at Otis Street burned, put it out of business. All the 600 railroad ties burned in one day at that location. There were just a number of things that caused the demise, and it had just eventually stopped running. Not without forewarning. There was plenty of warning. The owners just didn't believe that replacing equipment, doing maintenance work was going to be beneficial. So they shut them down. And then, of course, motor vehicles had taken over, pretty much. 1930 was also the year of the end of the trolleys, but it was also the beginning of what we know today as the Boston-Worcester Turnpike.
Which will be a later subject.
Which will be a later subject, which opened in late 1930.
Yeah, great. Now, let me just interrupt you again. You talk about the trolleys being powered electrically. How was the electricity generated? Because there were local plants, weren't they?
Overhead lines.
Yeah.
They had large generating plants. Like I said, there was one of those.
What fuel did they use to generate the electricity?
It was all shipped in from Worcester, from other generators. The generators on site were run.
Were they steam? Were they?
No, they were coal-fired.
Coal-fired.
I'm sorry, yeah. They were all coal-fired.
Okay. All local, yeah. I think the thing that's, at least for me, as we dig into the history of this town or anywhere in the country, we kind of gloss over the amount of labor that it took to build these infrastructures. we're in New England now. As you ride around and look at all the stone walls, and just stop and think, if you've ever worked in the woods or worked in the fields, how long it would take you to build one of those walls if you were doing it yourself. It's magnificent, and it's just miles and miles and miles of it. And you go to the trolley lines, the work that went in, that it took to build that, all done by hand. We're not talking about D8s and big fancy heavy equipment. We're talking about guys with shovels and sweat on their brow and just going to work every day.
And when you mentioned how big the stonework was, a perfect example is in Southborough on Courteville Road. There was a bridge that went over Courteville Road, and you can see the abutments on each side, and it's still there. You know, that was 1903 when they built that, and it's like it was just built.
Yeah.
The craftsmanship and the quality.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just unbelievable, and that stuff is still there. We still have a couple of cow passes.
Yeah.
In Westborough.
Yeah.
But it's all there.
When you go over to Northborough and you're along the Assabet River on the lowlands heading into Hudson, there's that bridge where it's an arch you go under.
Oh, the aqueduct.
The aqueduct.
Yeah.
Now, that had nothing to do with the trolleys.
No, that was MDC.
That's MDC water?
Yeah, that was water.
Okay.
That brought in the water from Wachusett.
Yeah, okay.
Still.
But that just strikes me as another example of remarkable construction.
A great structure that's still there.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't ever recall them doing any work to it.
Expanding it out now, you've described Westborough and its trolley systems. That's a small microcosm of a much bigger system that spread all up and down the East Coast, did it not?
It did. It went all the way into Maine.
Yeah.
All the way up and down the coast, way out into western Massachusetts. The lines that we're talking about, eventually hooked up into New York.
Yeah.
Down through Connecticut.
Yeah.
Basically along the coastal areas or heavily populated areas.
Yeah.
Where they could move people more effectively than horse and buggy and carriage.
Yeah.
And
describe the carriages, the machines themselves in terms of how you sat and whether they open or closed or.
Well, there were two different types of vehicles. One was called a trolley open and one was a closed. And the bigger ones they were so big, they were called battleships, which is strange, but if you had ever seen one coming down the road at you, you'd know why.
Probably the chief saw one, huh?
Yeah, no, I don't think he saw it. I think he stepped off, and he became part of the system.
I don't wish to make light of that. But,
no, but I know it's a little strange. But they were very large. They were glass and wood frames. They had bench seats in them. They were well appointed with nice hardwood. They weren't cheap at all, and they had the wheels under them were called trucks, and they were massive wheels and suspension systems under them, and the engines were also underneath, and they were very large General Electric motors that were ran on electricity overhead, and they all had a pole, a trolley pole, that went up from the trolley to the wire, and the energy was generated down that pole and to the engines, and that's moved the wheels. And initially, they had 2 men. They had an operator and they had a conductor. And the operator just operated the trolley, and the conductor would collect the fees. And in the late teens, early 20s, it went into a one-man system where it was more like a bus, where the trolley operator would actually collect the fare, and people would sit then. And then actually, a lot of those operators became bus drivers because the buses started in basically in 1925, 1926. So they were already running while the trolleys were running also. And they just took right over. In fact, the owner, the company that bought the Boston and Worcester right away also had a bus company called the Hart Bus Company. And his name was Roger Babson. Babson College. Well, that's who eventually bought the system, the Boston Worcester system, and the right-of-way. And it's the day the trolleys stopped running was the day the buses started running. So that there was no break in service. The 1.5 miles of Route 9 in Westborough became the median for today's road. So the trolley line for a very short period of time ran right down the middle of Route 9 in the median strip and then crossed over the eastbound lane and onto Park Street and then off the road. Didn't last very long.
Yeah.
But
you described the two trolleys themselves, glass and enclosed and open.
Yep.
If they were the open ones, you see so many pictures dramatized in films about people just jumping on from all sides.
Yes.
Were they open that way? You
Yes,
could just
they were.
Step on from anywhere?
Yep, you could step right onto them and just jump in. Those are the California trolleys that you see more often. But there were breaks in the sides where they could get right on and off, but there was also an enclosed area down below the knees so that people just weren't falling kind of out of them. Very, very popular in the summertime.
Did they change in the wintertime?
Yes, they
did.
did.
Closed ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
They took the summer trolley, the open trolley, and they parked it, and they actually took the motors out, the generator, and they put them in the winter cars, the closed cars, so that it was just interchangeable, and they just went to the winter car. And at the Yoder Street fire, they lost 6 cars in that fire that were in the barn.
Wow.
Everything just burned up on the inside. And then in a later fire, they lost all the ties.
Yeah.
But that was, even though it had a sprinkler system, it wasn't enough to, and I don't know how they sprinkled a building like that, because water had to come out of the local ponds. And when they talk about this fire, they said that they had to draft water out of Day Properties farm. The Day sisters had a farm on the corner of Otis Street, and so they drafted water out of that. And of course, they couldn't stop anything.
Now the materials, the steel would be coming from away, but what were the ties made of? Were they local made or were they brought in?
They were brought in at that time.
Okay.
Later on, after, and I'm not exactly sure what year it was, but there was a processing plant off of Otis Street called Montan, where that was a factory that treated telephone poles and railroad ties with creosote. And that operation, I know in the early 1930s, was a 7-day-a-week operation, because they were using so many of them, not only for the railroads, but just everything was growing, and telephone poles were being put up, new ones, and replaced old ones, and so that was a big business then. And there's another story about that.
Right.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah. Right.
And but most of the stuff was brought in by the railroads and dropped off either downtown or out there on Otis Street by the where Smith Parkway is now.
Yeah. Now you've written a book about it, and it's sitting right there looking at you now. Is there any place where you can go to see the actual cars? Are there any museums? Or?
There's one in Kennebunk, Maine, at the New England Trolley Museum, and it's got practically every type of trolley car that you could imagine. And that's what they did, was they acquired trolleys from all over the country, and they've got volunteers that have rehabbed and made these operable, and they've got miles of track.
They're really great.
And they take you for a little ride. That's great. It's a great little ride.
Yeah, that's super.
And I believe there's one in Connecticut also. a trolley museum.
How fast did they go?
They went about 20 miles an hour. The title here is maybe a little misleading, cornfield meat, because cornfield meat was actually a term used for a railway or trolley accident. And the accidents generally occurred in cornfields, out in the woods, in the more rural areas, rather than in a congested, densely populated area like Westborough Center or downtown Northborough or Marlborough Center. And that's where the term came from, because there were a great deal of cornfield meats. Not only trolley on trolley, but trolley with cows.
Oh yeah, okay.
Cars, people. I mean, you can't believe the number of accidents there were, and how does a trolley, a great big trolley, sneak up on somebody and they don't know it? But it happened. It happened a lot.
Yeah.
We had in Westborough the New England's worst trolley accident ever in 1903, when the big line, the Boston to Worcester line, hadn't completed its second rail track. So they were running on one track. And what had happened was, it was a Sunday, and one of the vehicles stopped at Washington Street. There was a station there and a crossing to pick up people and then head towards White's Corner. They had a car leave White's Corner headed for Westborough. And in this area of the woods, there was only one line, one set of tracks. And the motormen, although they could communicate by wire, they had these little phones, somehow got tripped up on who was on the track. And so the car from Washington Street started out, but the one from White's Corner was already on its way. And the operator of the Washington Street car saw the other one coming. He brought his trolley to a stop and had everybody get off. Well, the other guy was coming down a hill at 20 plus miles an hour because he's going downhill and he had it open anyways. Couldn't stop. And they collided head on. And one rode up over the other one, and I believe it killed 4 and sent a number to the hospital. And back then, we didn't have EMS.
Yeah.
So they had to put together a medical car real quick that came out of Framingham and pick up all the injured and the dead and take them back to Framingham Hospital. So, I mean...
A long time.
Yep, yeah, that was scary too. I mean, and not only you have the worst accident in New England trolley history, but then you have a response time that's just unheard of nowadays.
Yeah.
We did have another accident just over the Westborough line the first month it opened. That was also a head-on collision. Again, single track, a car leaving Otis Street station hit a car that was coming from Shrewsbury head-on. Fortunately, most of the people got off. And there's pictures in there of the actual accidents with the injured alongside the trolley with their umbrellas up mid-July, because they all had umbrellas then.
For the heat, yeah.
And
tell me, Glenn, do you mechanically, maybe you know the answer or maybe you don't, but how did they stop them? What was the brake system?
it was all friction.
On the track?
All friction on the track.
Okay, yeah.
So they could reverse the engines, but that wasn't going to help much.
Were they big things that went down on the track?
No, they went down on the wheels.
On the wheels, okay.
Yeah, right on the wheels. They did cut the engines. It says in some of the accident reports, they cut the engine and hit the brakes, but in the big ones, it was very difficult to stop because it was metal on metal. And then when they got wet or in the winter, it was even more difficult. And they had a problem with leaves. Leaves were very slippery for them, and they just couldn't get the friction to bring them to a good complete stop real quickly.
Yeah.
So it took a while.
Do they have sandboxes on the wheels?
They had sandboxes on all of them and in the vehicles themselves, because in the winter months they had to sand down the tracks in order for them to move along when they got stuck. And that was a big problem later on. That's why they stopped running in the winter, because of the ice and the snow. They just quit. But
Well, it's a fascinating history, and it's a piece that we often don't know much about. I can remember when I first came to town, riding down West Main Street where the stores are, and going brrrr along, and wonder what was making my car do that. And then I discovered that it was where the railroad ties had not been removed yet.
yeah, and we're still to this day discovering some ironwork, some spikes, pieces, parts in the roadways. When they go to dig them up to do a repair job or something, all of a sudden they'll run into a railroad tie and they'll say, what is this doing here? And it's because it just got buried.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's you know, a couple areas in town where you can actually see the bridges.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Well, it's a fascinating history, and I thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this morning and telling us about it. And we'll do more of the history of this town. There's a lot of stories to be told.
there certainly are.
And you've got a lot of them, so we'll have you back. Next time you'll be talking about the roads, and that's,
Thank you.
we want to hear that. So thanks a lot,
Okay.
Glenn.
Thank you,
Thank you
Bob.
very much.
Good to be with you again.
Thank you.